Chapter 1. The silver Airstream trailer smelled of rotting flesh. Even the unmerciful winter wind howling through the open back window could not cleanse the stench that had embedded itself deep within the fibers of that vehicle. The scuffed lacquered wood, scarred aluminum, and ragged fabric, like a boring beetle. They had disposed of the corpses of the 2 teenagers they had picked up along the Michigan border nearly a day before, burying them in a bank of snow far away within the woods, so deep that it would take until early spring to find them if the wild things did not whittle them down before the first blooms emerged. However, it had not been before the preliminary signs of decay had begun to manifest in the bodies, rigor mortis stiffening their limbs, their bellies bloated, and skins sallow. It was a lilted prose, a marred poetry that needled with brimstone bitterness at the edges of reality. Yet silence prevailed, an oppressive quiet, the kind born of resignation and betrayal, for all knew there was only one among them who kept them in such destitution, such squalor, Neil, whose love affair with heroin continued well into his new life, had an obsessive fascination with the dead. He would mumble of mummification practices and ancient rites to honor the deceased, as he treated their expired victims like precious dolls, showing them a respect and mercy in complete contradiction to the torture he had inflicted upon them in life. The others endured Neil's behavior with silent, sideways disgust. It was easier than trying to reattach one's limbs to their bodies. Methodically, in their psychotic and haphazard way, they had covered their tracks, stumbling back into the trailer and the pickup that towed it, 5 grim, haggard vagabonds, pale as the moonlight, reflecting off the snow-covered boughs of the pines above. Eyes glowing with jaguar phosphorescence, they hissed and growled at one another with the familial, feral distaste of those thrown together in violence. Tristan watched the others clamber through the open metal door as he stood in the snow. An image of a deer running through the forest raced through his mind, its hooves puncturing the shimmering, pristine new powder, its heart thundering against its ribs as white plumes of breath exploded from its flaring nostrils. He moved his toes within the duct-tape mended boots, his calves' muscles twitching. Swallowing hard, he cast a glance down the road the way they had come, tracing the swerving curves of their tracks like a frozen river. The needling sensation of being stalked soured in the pit of his stomach. The road was empty and dark. Would it always be this way? Though he fought to keep the white noise of apathy from electrocuting what was left of his humanity, such thoughts still struck hard and cold against his psyche from time to time, like hail against a tin roof. The depth of the quicksand was unknowable, the cold murk rising a little higher with each futile resistance, pressing down on his chest until he could not breathe. Silent and still he remained, a shade of his former person, existing without existence, living without life, an inscrutable observer, unmoved by the inarticulate madness that danced the same sad dance each night, like a derelict dollar theater. Broken and disjointed. Together they were hollow marionettes whose collective conscience had been dislocated and left to dangle at awkward, painful angles. This was not the life he had envisioned, nor the one promised by Dorian, the pack leader. No coffers of gold secreted away from mortal detection, no glamorous jet setting brimming with exotic experiences had by those that apologies no longer held hostage at knife point. This world of theirs, now his for over 20 years, was tragic and harsh, a hemorrhaging bruise of madness that was utterly inescapable. To be lifted out of the gutters of his mortal existence and tossed into the mouth of hell seemed a cruel fate even for an undesirable such as Tristan, whose contribution to the world since his transformation had been the murder of his abusive father, a series of epic bank robberies even Billy the Kid would have been proud of, and hundreds of innocent lives drained away in unspeakable ways he had not ever thought himself capable of. He no longer felt in control of his own life. following blindly without even a ghost of hope for the evil he had stood witness to, though it was through his own eyes he watched himself perpetrate actions that surpassed the term of crime. Then again, his human life was a wasted 2 decades of jaded malaise, in which control was something he again had left to those around him, friends, employers, faculty, family. Whatever had fueled him as a human had been incinerated, the gray ash blowing away in the cold wind of realization that this state of being was permanent, eternal. He only understood now that one's mortal darkness was sealed within their bodies upon the moment of transformation. He could not tell if Dorian, Neil, or Diana desired to change, to be anything other than these entities of twisted, merciless carnage. They were content to covet the madness, worshipping at the feet of their predatory instincts until little of their human nature remained. Tristan wondered if one day they would become so feral that they might take to all fours, disappearing into the woods like wolves to hunt each other as much as the warm-blooded mammals they pursued. In a way, he looked forward to such a time, when the last of his humanity faded, for only then he could perhaps be at peace with what he had become. Tristan was uncertain where they were headed. Dorian rarely revealed his plans, remaining secretive as if he feared a betrayal by his own bloodkin if their final destination was made public knowledge. It might have been a residual echo of his own internal paranoia, but Tristan swore Dorian's manic suspicion of the world had been increasing steadily over the course of the past week, ever since they left New York City, after a particularly violent slaughter of 3 punks in an alley behind a Brooklyn club. They had been all shaken to their blackened cores. The incident, which none within the remaining tread could yet speak aloud of, had cost them the life of their youngest, a tragic waif of a teenage girl that had gone by the name of Blind Mouse. The image of her eviscerated corpse crucified over the exit sign was permanently branded into Tristan's gore-streaked mind. There was nothing he could think or do to scour clean the residue of that memory that burned like acid through the layers of his remaining sanity. It had been a hunting trip that had begun like any of the other countless others as they had identified an establishment where their psychotic gutter-punk appearance, cultivated to disguise the preternatural glow of their snow-white skin and give them an air of forgettable, wasted youth, would not be scrutinized. A place where the years of cigarette smoke coated the walls of graffiti and ancient photocopied band flyers like an acrid lacquer that seeped through your clothes and into your skin if you leaned against it too long. A dive where the locals roosted like starving, diseased carrion vultures, waiting to pick one another off in a red haze of directionless aggression and counterculture boredom. The doorman had never even noticed their entrance, slipping past him in a blur of patchwork apparel and piercings to slither about the perimeter of the tiny club to the sideways glances of the regulars marking the sudden unwanted appearance of fresh meat. In silence, they had singled out 3 rough-ridden souls already on the brink of self-destruction, Neil making sure to note the heroin tracks on one girl's arms to his utter delight, for the orgasmic indulgence of feeding would be far more intense for him if she were high. With a single collective subconscious suggestion, their trio of prey uprooted themselves from the bar stools with expressions of curiosity to follow the vagabond strangers out into the sinister shadows of the alley. Upon hindsight, Tristan was sure he had been the only one to notice the 4th figure, a mere shadow separating from between 2 of the other bar patrons, like a billowing plume of toxic smoke from an oil fire. He remembered now the twinge of unexplainable anxiety that had flooded his body, adrenaline electrocuting his nervous system, as if he had been doused from head to toe in ice water. But he had shaken it off, convinced it was merely another sign of his degenerating ability to separate reality from hallucination, for so much of his own reality surpassed the human definition of surreal to the point of nightmare. The sound of his duct-taped rat combat boots striking the black asphalt, oil slicks of refuse and runoff glistening in the slanted dull orange light of the distant street lamp, echoed as the hollow metal click of the door closing behind him launched the alleyway into instantaneous anarchy. The sight of his tribe leaping towards their victims like lions upon hapless fawn cast a red haze over the world like a black and white noir film colored brutally by the hand of a whiskey-drunk painter. His instinct grabbed hold of his resistance, throttling it until it fell unconscious, sinking down into the deep bruised souls of his own shadows. He joined the fray, but not before taking note of the shadow he had seen within the bar slip past him with an arctic breeze to expand as if evaporating within the center of them all. Tristan struggled to recount the next few moments, his only memories that of the taste of salty skin and blood as he ripped into the jugular of the man nearest to him, clutching him by the nape of the neck so tightly that he could hear the vertebrae splinter and pop, the man's right wrist snapping as he fought. The instants of pure, unadulterated carnal bliss erupted into chaos as the splitting screams of his tribe ripped him from his prey. Dazed and drunk, he lifted his head to see their eyes cast upward to where Blind Mouse hung. Her execution had been silent. There had been no warning of the attack, and no sound at the moment she had been thrown up against the wall and crucified with barbed wire, the side of her massacred belly a vacuous black cavern exposing her spine without trace of entrails, bespoke a force greater than the sum total of anything they had encountered. Staggering backwards, their eyes wide with pure horror, they had broken into a run before the full impact of their fallen comrade could be processed. They knew all too well that their unearthly shrieks would quickly gather unwanted attention from those closest to the exit. Blood-smeared and catatonic, they had thrown themselves into the trailer and truck parked beneath the Washington Bridge and peeled out of town. From the city, they had headed southwest through Pennsylvania into Ohio, before steering north again towards Michigan. Neil gibbered to himself of death coming to claim them, to harvest them as they had done so many before. He ranted for hours, his face pressed against the back window as the residual heroin from his victim's veins raced through his, until Tristan had finally struck him hard against the base of his skull in hopes of sending him into unconsciousness. The opposite ensued, as Neil turned on Tristan with a crazed blindness eager to direct his delirious terror upon anyone besides his own mind. Like two starved hyenas, they tackled one another, tossing each other into the walls of the silver trailer with such force that 50 miles outside of town, Dorian was forced to pull over and pry the two apart before they could rip a vital organ from one another's chests. With iron fists of relentless rage, Dorian had subdued Tristan and Neil until they both crawled on their bellies back to the trailer, blood seeping from their broken jaws into the freshly fallen snow on the shoulder of the old country road. Their bodies would heal, and quickly, from the fresh blood, but only to seal in the newly spawned demons. As he watched the two young vampires struggling to haul themselves upright, Dorian had growled down at them that they would not speak of the happenings of that night ever again. There was such terror beneath his anger, as if the mere mental replaying of the night might summon forth whatever creature had eviscerated Blind Mouse. All the while, Diana sat in the cab of the pickup, staring blankly ahead, her mouth slightly agape, her eyes seeing nothing but the black of night. Now Tristan, curled up in the back corner of the Airstream, on a bed of assorted quilts and comforters stolen from a small-town department store. The year previous, a strange desire for creature comforts had motivated them to rifle for odds and ends such as soft bedding, books, and a few strands of multicolored Christmas lights, which Neil had put to use on a victim or two. Tristan wondered if the others had blocked Blind Mouse's death from their minds completely. It was impossible to tell with Neil, for he was always one shade darker than crazy, while Dorian and Diana were surrounded by walls of impenetrable slate steel, through which Tristan could sense nothing of their internal states. In a time when he felt they needed to band together more closely than ever, they were greater strangers to one another than ever before. The loneliness was overwhelming, the hissing of the tires through the snow along the dark forest roads lending more comfort than any of his brooding bloodkin would extend. He dared not voice the worrisome whine that bored into the base of his skull like a drill bit. They had not left New York without a trail, tracers of energy, Dark forces could taste with forked tongues like the exhaust of electrified pheromones. From time to time he would unfurl himself, pulling his arms out from under the quilt to push aside the small, heavy curtain over the back window. The battery-operated Christmas lights strung around the edge of the ceiling above the window created a colorful, euphoric distortion about the portal of metal and glass, causing the winter night to appear like a child's snow globe. A fresh drift had begun, small white flakes floating sideways in the wind to cover the frozen black earth beneath their freshly plowed tracks. He wanted to be free, to turn feral and take to the forest after the deer he had sensed a few miles back, even if it were actually he who was truly the hunted.